Welcome to Scotch and Smoke Rings episode 465. I am your friendly neighborhood Oxhorn, here as always with my suspenders set to maximum stun. Got a great show for you today. Checking sound really quickly. To Scotch and Smoke Rings episode 400 and... It's working. Great. So here's the deal. I know that today isn't Thursday, but I was moving Thursday. Thursday was my big move day. And I did know that I wanted to do an episode of Scotch and Smoke Rings, but I thought, okay, I'm going to do it Friday. And then I couldn't do it Friday because of moving. And then I'm like, all right, well, I'm going to do it Saturday. And I couldn't find anything in any of my boxes, so I couldn't do it Saturday. Besides, I wanted to make a video for you for today. And so I spent all day yesterday working on my Divergence video. And then I figured, well, I'll do it Sunday. And today's Sunday, and I've been unpacking all day. Today's been a busy day for unpacking. And then I shot some footage for some content I'm going to be doing this coming week. And then as the day winds down, I'm sitting here going, you know what, I better do a live stream. So here I am, Scotch and Smoke Rings, episode 465. So glad to have you in the program. Yeah, everyone in the chat is saying my hat. I would have worn my hat. My hat is my show hat. I don't think I've ever done an episode of Scotch and Smoke Rings without my hat. In fact, this is the first episode of Scotch and Smoke Rings without my hat, but it's still in one of these boxes. I haven't had an opportunity to unpack yet. And honestly, I don't know when I'm going to. Because as you can see, there's no furniture in here. I have my desk, I have that chair, and that's it. I don't have any office furniture. I bought the house and I'm like, I should probably get furniture. But then I remembered furniture costs money. And yeah, I just bought a house. So I can't afford furniture right now. So I'm probably not going to be unpacking anytime soon. So expect pretty much exactly what we've been having for the last 6 years or whatever. Boxes and all sorts of stuff in the background without an actual office for quite some time. Welcome new sponsor, Joey Matronics. Good to have on the program. So because this entire week has been a whirlwind for me, I'm not going to be playing a game today. So let's just do about an hour of Q&A talking about the Divergence, because I just released a big video on the Divergence today. Had a lot of fun putting it together, put a lot of research into it. Was a great blast, and I've been reading almost all of your comments. They've been amazing comments. Really, really making me interested in the topic. So yeah, today's the big Divergence special Q&A. But as always, well, not as always, because there are some things that are different today. I don't have any Scotch today. And the reason for that is because all of my Scotch glasses are still packed up. So I'm stuck with beer. And I'm not complaining. It's a good beer. But I did find my cigars. I didn't have to look very far because I made sure to keep them in the car with me as we drove to the new place. Packed away all the Scotch, packed away all my Scotch glasses, but the cigars, you keep those close to your heart. Now, come on, don't do this to me, please. There we go. Woohoo. No, I didn't care. So, my goal, my ultimate goal with this new office is to install some sort of exhaust fan in the wall, because I can do that now, right? I own the home. Well, I've got a mortgage on the home. But I could put an exhaust fan in the wall, so I'm working on finding a contractor to do this for me. But in the meantime, I have far less privacy because my office is right on the main floor of my house, and so my wife and kids are all right outside that door playing and, you know, watching television and playing games. And yet, in order to get a cigar to work in here, I've got to keep my door open a crack so that my fan in that window allows a channel of air to push all of the smoke out. Otherwise, I would just smoke out my entire family. So, hopefully they won't interrupt us. I think they're going to be really good. But it means that I've got to sort of rig up a little bit here. Ooh, by the way, got to show you. New lighter. My luck with lighters is atrocious. I don't know why, but every single lighter I've ever had has been horrible. Hey, new sponsor! Silver Husky Gamer. Pleasure to have you on the program, Silver Husky Gamer. I'm so glad you're here. I've had horrible luck with lighters. Either I can't get it to work, or when I put the fuel into it, it doesn't work for very long, and I've got to keep clicking it. But this came free with a box of cigars that I bought, this box of cigars. And if you remember from a few weeks ago, I got a free lighter with a box of cigars, and it was horrible. Absolutely awful. So I figured, well, this one's going to be horrible too. Not so. This is the best lighter I've ever had. Check this out. It's angled ever so slightly, perfect for lighting cigars. I can just tip it back. Oh, look at that. Do I have to twist my arm? No, just tip it back. Perfect. And then we just toast the end. Just toast it. Toast it. Perfect. Neon G says, thank you for making the Fallout universe more understandable. Made me look back and replay the games. You are indeed welcome. Thank you so much for watching. Jacob Adolf with a wonderful tip. Thank you very much, good sir. Mr. Cardinal says, how much for a box of cigars, and what's the quantity of it? Well, it varies. You can buy them as singles. You can get a 5-pack cigar box, 25-pack cigar box. I tend to get 25-pack cigar boxes just because you get more bang for your buck and it doesn't run out as quickly. You can get a good mid-range hand-rolled cigar, a 25 box, a box of 25 hand-rolled cigars in decent mid-range quality for about 60 to 70 bucks. And that's what I typically smoke on the program, which is the La Auroras. But I decided to splurge and I spent $100. I know, it's $100 on a box of 25 Alec Bradley Black Market Estates. These were highly reviewed on Cigar Aficionado. It had it was a 93, I believe it was. And they've been great. I don't know if I'd say that they're better. Well, okay, they're better than the La Auroras that I typically smoke. Okay, I can taste the difference, but it's not a huge difference. I don't know if I would do this again, but I wanted to splurge, so. Dave A says, congrats, Ox. Keep on keeping on. Well, thank you. I will keep on keeping on. Dawson, with a tip, says the Brotherhood of Steel are hypocrites. They say that they're hoarding knowledge and technology to prevent the next Dark Age. Don't they realize that by taking away science from others, they are causing the next Dark Age? Well, yeah. I mean, okay. There's a lot about the Brotherhood of Steel that's messed up. Would I call them hypocrites? No, because their entire goal isn't about preventing the next Dark Age. Their goal isn't about... Okay, so when you think of a Dark Age, you think of an age that does not have enlightenment, where people were not as educated and people just didn't understand science and reproduction and everything that went on. That's a Dark Age. Now, the Brotherhood's goal is not to prevent another Dark Age. Their goal is to keep technology out of the hands of people who would abuse it. So they approached the apocalypse in a strange way. Instead of saying, you know, there's something wrong with humanity that we need to change, they thought there's something wrong with technology. And we need to make sure people can't get their hands on that technology because technology is dangerous. Which is partially true, but it's impossible. You can't take all technology. On one hand, because there's not a finite amount of technology in the universe, because even if they got every single pre-war bit of technology, people could still produce technology. Technology came from people. There are more people on this earth in the post-apocalypse than the Brotherhood of Steel could ever manage. And those people will produce technology, like the Institute, for example, which is why, of course, they came. So it's just an impossible goal to hoard all of technology. But that's their reasoning. Their reasoning is to prevent another apocalypse, to keep that technology out of the hands of people who would abuse it, not necessarily to prevent a Dark Age. Fleet Master Michael says, Zox, perfect timing. I just got home. And have you gotten a beta code yet? And great video today. Yes, I finally got my beta code. It took them long enough to get it to me. I probably waited a week and a half to 2 weeks to get my beta code. But I finally got it. So whenever they release the beta, I'm there. And I'll be broadcasting it for all of you. Feral Mochi, that's an interesting name, says, hey, Oxhorn, just got home from work and as you... Oh. Did I just read his comment? I think I might. Did I just... I don't know if I'm... Anyway, he says, just got home from work and you started your stream, so I'm glad I caught you. And I'm glad the move is going well. Yeah. The only hard part about the move is now the unpacking. Well, okay, it was incredibly expensive, the move. Oh my gosh, moving. I'm so glad I'm never going to do it again. It was horrible. My pocketbook. Just way too much money. Ugh. But I'm here, and now we just have to unpack. So it's finding time to unpack, while also working and keeping my content, my channel filled with content. So yeah, it's a challenge. But you know what? I'm up to the challenge. Nathaniel says, I'm so glad I found your channel. You completely renewed my love for the Fallout franchise and made me change the way I play. By really soaking in the lore. Keep up the great work. Well, that's awesome. That was the goal of my channel. I'm so glad that I'm able to rekindle your love for the franchise. Mustachero says, for the NCR or Yes Men ending in New Vegas, can you use a dog to scout out an assassin? Are you talking about, you'll know it when it happens? Is that one of the options? You could go to one of the dogs that the NCR has and say, here, boy, go find the assassin. Is that how it works? I'll have to look into it. Frozen Nexus says, this whole time I thought you wore the hat because you were bald. Turns out you've got more hair than me. Well, yeah, you know what? For some reason, I think that's common. When I was younger, when I was in my early 20s, I've always worn hats. I enjoy hats, but I used to wear a baseball cap to work every day. This was back when I worked as a hotel van driver. I did the graveyard shift for a hotel near to the airport, and I did that while I was in college. It paid my way through college, but I wore this baseball cap every day to work. And one day, I took it off to scratch my head, and my coworkers. I had one coworker working, and she stopped, deer in headlights, and she goes, "Oh my gosh, this whole time I thought you were bald," because there was another guy that worked there, who he was much older than me. He was in his 40s at the time, but he also wore a baseball cap, and he was completely bald. So I guess she just did this association where she assumed that I must be bald too because I wore the cap. But I just like the cap. Hats feel nice on the head. The Fox Shinks and LPS Ice Show says, I love your vids. Thank you. Thank you for the tip. I don't understand your name, but I do appreciate the tip. Thank you very much. All right, I think I'm caught up on... Nope, there's more. Euronymous, with a wonderful tip, says, would you ever do a lore video on your characters, explaining why they made the choices they did and what their backstory is? Yeah, I did that video already. Well, I kind of did that video. So I honestly don't really get into the role-playing. I know it's weird hearing me say that, but I don't. I think a little bit about my characters. I get it. So I choose a faction, and I choose whether I want them to be evil, sort of gray, or good, and that's about as far as I take it. And so as I play the game, I'll make decisions based on that sort of leaning. I don't get into a big backstory. But I did a video, which is called Characters, so just Google Oxhorn Characters and you can find it, where I went through all 4 of my primary characters, who sided with all 4 of the different factions in Fallout 4. I went over all of their gear, all of the mods I used for those characters individually, and then I also talked briefly about their story. So, just, you can Google that. Mustachiro says, spoilers, Arizona Killer. You can use an NCR dog or Rex to sniff out the assassin in the crowd. Well, not Arizona Killer. You mean you'll know it when it happens, because Arizona Killer is the Legion version, and I wouldn't want to sniff out the assassin if I'm the assassin, right? So you'll know it when it happens. Okay, I didn't know that you could get Rex or an NCR dog to sniff out the assassin. That's pretty cool. I'll have to remember that. Jacob says, so this new background's still going to have the same backdrop? Yeah, for a while. You're still going to see a lot of boxes for quite some time, even though I'm in a new place. Until I finish unpacking. Tolerable Ship says, will you play Fallout 76 with the community every now and then? I don't know. I don't know what it's going to be like. I don't think I'll be able to, because I get the impression that Fallout 76 is going to be this small server where you can't really choose. Like, you show up and the people that are on this server with you at that time are not going to be different. Are they going to be different? Or do you get to know the people that are on your server because they're always there? I'm not sure how it's going to work. We'll see. We'll see as the date approaches. Hey, new sponsor, Terry. Pleasure to have you in the program. Reptilian Lizard, as opposed to Mammalian Lizard, says, are you a movie guy? If so, you should watch Good Time. It's incredibly realistic and just an amazing movie. Good Time. I'll jot down the name. I do enjoy movies, but I don't have time for them these days, sadly. Jessica says, I love your channel. Consider the possibility that some things remained unchanged. Companies change names, but keep their estate. I don't know what that means. Certain guns are still invented. Certain songs are still written. Right. Okay, so back to the topic of the broadcast, the Divergence. Thank you, Jessica. And Mr. Junkmuck says, really enjoyed the Divergence episode. Well, thank you very much. Dawson says, I mostly agree, but the leaders of the Outcasts say that's exactly what they are doing. I think what they may be... Well, I don't know for sure, but I think what they may be saying is that their efforts would lead to a dark age. Not necessarily that their goal is to bring about a dark age. Right? So they're not exactly... The Outcasts disagree with a very specific faction of the Brotherhood of Steel, the Lions Brotherhood of Steel. They were former members of the Brotherhood of Steel. It's interesting that they would complain about that when they want to revert back to Roger Maxson's original vision, which was to hoard more technology for themselves. Yeah, I need to look into that more, because I mean, that would make sense to me. Gamma Vlad says, hey Oxhorn, any chance you'll ever upload the Gauss Rifle sound mod you created for Fallout 3? I would love to use it on my next playthrough. Probably not, because I got the sound from the Gauss Rifle you can get from the Creation Club, and I'm pretty sure I could get in trouble by taking that sound file out and creating a mod that I then release publicly, when in order to get that, you have to pay for it. So probably not. You get me into talking, and then my cigar goes out. So regarding the Divergence, Jessica, there were many comments on my video this morning that echoed the same sentiment. Just because there was a Divergence doesn't mean that certain songs weren't written, certain guns weren't created, so on and so forth. And I understand that, I respect that, but I don't think that that's accurate, and the reason is because it is a Divergence. So the language that is used to describe the Divergence is in the singular and not the plural. It is the Divergence, which gives the impression that there is only one. In order for this idea to be true, that the Divergence doesn't necessarily, it's not one point in time, then they wouldn't be using singular pronouns. They wouldn't be talking about it as a single event. It would be the Divergences, right? But in all of the founding, so we're talking about world building, and all of the world building documentation about Fallout, they refer to the Divergence as a singular event instead of multiple events. Now, in order for the reality that we see in the games to be true, it can't be a singular event, as I tried to explain in my video today. Which means I think ultimately there is no divergence. It's not a singular divergence. There was an anomaly, some sort of timeline anomaly that is possibly even still ongoing, that has been altering the timeline as some sort of butterfly effect. That I think is the best explanation to meld all of the evidence that we find in the game. Now, I know that many people were saying, well, even if it is just a single divergence, that doesn't mean that there can't be some of the same things happening later on. And I disagree with that, because a divergence isn't just, a one-time thing. Oh, I diverged, and now I'm back. Oh, I diverged again, and now we're back. That's not a divergence. When you diverge, you change paths. If you're driving down the road and there's a split in the road, that's a divergence. You can take one or the other. You can't take both. You can't straddle both. And once you choose a path, every person you meet along that path is different from anyone you would meet down the other path, as a necessary consequence of the physics behind having to go down one path. It's impossible, if it were a divergence, for the same things to happen on two completely different paths. With, of course, the exception of blind luck. Maybe there are two identical twins out there. One chose to walk down one path, and one chose to walk down the other path, and you will reach them on either timeline at the exact same moment. That's always possible. Exceedingly unlikely. And even more unlikely for that to happen time and time and time and time again, which is what we find in the Fallout universe. Time and time again, we find songs, weapons, armor, architecture, locations, even some people that are exactly identical to the ones we find in our own universe, which is extremely unlikely to find if there was a divergence. So I understand that many people are trying to explain away these issues by saying that the divergence wouldn't cause this, or that there wasn't one single point in time. But if we believe the language of the people who built this world, we have to come to that conclusion, which is why it's referred to as a divergence or the divergence. It's that singular point in time. So in order to meld that with the evidence that we find, it can't be a divergence. It has to be something else. So I think the language was simply used improperly. We're all coming back to Chapter 6. We're talking about, this entire conversation comes down to one brief 2-sentence line in like the third paragraph of Chapter 6 of Chris's Fallout Bible that he released back in 2002, where he says, and I quoted it in the video this morning, where he says, yeah, we're not going to talk about the divergence, but it was an event, it happened, and it was sometime after World War II. That's all he says about it. And all of this conversation is coming from that talk. And he probably didn't put a whole lot of thought into the language that he used to describe it. And I think he used the wrong words. I don't think he should have described it as a divergence. Instead, I think he should have talked about it as a timeline anomaly. Dawson says, you kind of misunderstood my comments, but that's okay. I still agree, and I'm still a huge fan. Once you do your video on the Outcasts, you'll come across the dialogue and see what I mean. Okay, yeah, I mean, maybe I completely missed that. Maybe I just am not prepared. I'm not knowledgeable enough to talk about that. So, yeah, I'll look into that. Tom says, how do you like working graves, Ox? You mean back when I worked the graveyard shift as a hotel van driver? I didn't mind it. I was starting my first YouTube channel at that time. So when there was a lot of downtime. And when I wasn't working, I would work on videos on my computer. I'd bring my laptop to work, and I would work on YouTube videos way back in the day. Frozen Nexus says, I usually put your videos on as I fall asleep, and then I wake up with the urge to buy your merchandise. Has this all just been a long con to hypnotize people in their sleep? Yes, that's what it is. My videos are just subliminal messages. Every 30 seconds, just in the background. If you listen closely, you'll hear me whisper, buy a shirt. Oxhorn shirts. It's really low. You may have to slow down the speed a little bit. And then every 60th frame, I flash the word shirt really quickly. It's in big, bold, white text. Shirt. Just one frame. 60 more frames. Shirt. I should do that one episode just to see if people catch it. Oh, I'd get so many angry people. Oh, that's hilarious. No, I'm not subliminally. The point of my channel is not to sell shirts. The shirts are icing on the cake. Ian Harrison says estimated. Oh, it's an abbreviation for estimated. I didn't know you could abbreviate that word. I see. Okay, thank you. That makes sense. Omnito says you're a huge inspiration to me. Thanks for everything. Well, thank you very much for the tip. I do appreciate it. Red Panda Arts says, hey, Oxhorn, you are the most calm and relaxing person I've seen. I fell asleep to your videos in my closet one time. Great. You want to buy a shirt? Well, thank you. I'm glad you're watching. Kyle says, hey, Oxhorn, new content on the Creation Club, new vid on it. Yes, I spent all day today recording footage on the Creation Club, and might I say, well done, Bethesda, on this latest round of Creation Club stuff. The house, or the player home, but the weapon is amazing. I don't want to steal my own thunder. I'm going to talk about it. It's not only such a great tool, but the quest you go through to get it was so much fun. I can't wait to talk about it. But yeah, I will be talking about that next week. I'll be working on those videos tomorrow. And so you should have a video on that on Tuesday. Also, a new LA Noire video coming out this coming week. And I'm shooting footage for a short series on Rivet City. Paul says, hey, Oxhorn, do you play Final Fantasy? If so, can you do a lore video on Final Fantasy? I played Final Fantasy as a child. Final Fantasy VII was really my first introduction to role-playing games. I hadn't played anything before that. I hadn't played D&D, I hadn't played any other role-playing games. It was my first introduction to that sort of idea, even though it was a JRPG. But I don't even think it was called a JRPG at the time. I mean, this was the 90s. And man, I fell in love with Final Fantasy VII. That was so great. I didn't play any of the others. I tried to play 8, couldn't get into it. My brother played 9. I would watch him every now and then. I couldn't get into it. 10 came out. I was absolutely not interested in 10. I don't know. For some reason, after 7, the franchise didn't appeal to me. So, back to the Divergence. The reason the Divergence... Oh, Ian says, I've been corrected. It meant established. Okay. I can understand shortening established because they use that word a lot on architecture. Established in 1932 or whatever. All right. Makes a lot of sense. Anyway, back to the Divergence. The reason the Divergence is important, and the entire reason we're having this conversation, is because of retrofuturism. This is something I should have included in my video this morning, but I'm actually thinking of spinning this off into a completely different video. But I'll give you the cliff notes now, so spoiler alert. I haven't even made this video, but this is what I'm thinking of making. So, the guys sat down, they said, let's make a post-apocalyptic game. We want it to look like, we don't want it to look like every other game. We want it to have a unique look and feel. Oh, I know. Let's set it in a world where the 1950s never ended. Where their vision of the future actually became reality. Where everything was nuclear powered, but the culture of the 50s didn't change. Okay, well, how do we do that? They then had to come up with a plot mechanic to explain that world. And that plot mechanic was the Divergence. The divergence is what allows Fallout to be a retro-futuristic or atomic-futuristic world. It's the only thing that explains why the crazy hair and big hair bands of the 1980s never happened. Why grunge of the 90s never happened. Why we don't go into post-apocalyptic bedrooms and find posters of Kurt Cobain on the walls, right? Why we don't find smartphones with all conversations written in emojis. Because the divergence changed everything. It altered the timeline so that the entire culture of the 50s went on, and the future that they envisioned for themselves at the time, which they expressed in music and art and especially movies, actually happened. Now the problem is, if the divergence isn't a single point in time, it can't sustain retrofuturism. You see? So think of it as a circle. There's a divergence. The divergence explains retrofuturism. The culture is stuck in the 50s. Technology is as people envisioned it would happen in the 50s. Oh, but I really want Picatinny rails on my guns. All right, we'll put Picatinny rails on the guns, even though they were made in the 90s. Kind of outside of the 50s. But you know what? We'll just pretend that like the divergence wasn't a divergence. It was like one of many divergences. And we'll explain this, we'll justify this by saying, well, everything else changed, but this one thing didn't change. And they point back to the divergence. But you see that it's become a bit of circular reasoning. In order to get there, you've got the divergence explaining retrofuturism, but then you've got the Picatinny rails being explained by multiple divergences, and they're going in a complete circle. So it doesn't really work that way. And I'm gonna nail this down with better language when I get down to making the video. But you can't. It's there. The fact that the divergence was a split is, I think, the only thing that explains the retrofuturistic world. Because without it, if we can allow for Picatinny rails, we can allow for The View on television in Fallout. No one wants to see that. No one wants to see that. Also, in the Fallout universe. I mean, in ours as well. But, I mean, in the Fallout, no one wants to see that. Find an old holotape and it's a recording of The View? No! No one wants to see that. But you could justify it using the same logic. Well, yeah, sure, there was a divergence, but that doesn't mean everything had to change. We decide, who's to say that the Fallout universe didn't have a TV program called The View, where they just talked about, I don't know, chocolate or something. What did they talk about? You see how it can then justify everything? If the divergence wasn't a singular point in time, then there's no Fallout universe. There's no retrofuturistic world. Because you could then use the divergence to explain anything you wanted to put in it. Which is what we find. With the developers breaking the divergence, they're giving themselves room to put anything in the universe that they really want. Including Picatinny rails. Or music that wasn't even recorded until the 80s or the 90s. It's like, oh, I thought we had this 50s thing, this retrofuturistic atom thing going on, atomic. No, we're putting that away now. Okay, so it's just not Fallout anymore. We're just sort of doing a retrofuturistic sci-fi post-apocalyptic thing. Just, that's what we're doing now. Okay. Anyhow, I'll work my thoughts out on that later. But that's what I've been thinking. Nihonji says, I found a holotape of Jerry Springer. What do I do? Send it back to the Divergence. Just put it back in our universe. Cool Blue says, I watched your video where you drank a slushie and alcohol. Oh, where I talked about that story? Have you ever tried getting drunk with something else? Or ever dared to? Love you. No, I mean, the reason I told that story is because that was my story explaining why I don't get drunk. Because I had that one experience. And it wasn't fun. And it's not worth it. Drink, I mean, the point of a beverage like this is to enjoy it slowly, over a period of time, while chatting with friends. It's, you know, it loosens the mouth and allows you to talk more freely. That's the point. Not to get drunk, ruin your time. Why would I do that? I'm not going to ruin my time. It's out again. J.R. Russell says, are you a classic car fan? You give off the vibe. I'm not, but I'm a guy who has a deep appreciation for people who are classic car fans. I watch the Grand Tour. That's about as into cars as I get. I used to watch the original Top Gear before the horrible accident. But now Top Gear isn't worth watching. So now I watch the Grand Tour, and I really enjoy that program. And I love when they'll stop and they'll do a documentary. In the latest season of the Grand Tour, this is what I watch when I'm rendering my videos. At least that's what I've been watching lately. They stopped and did an entire episode talking about... It was a documentary talking about the history between Lorenzo? I'm thinking Lorenzo Cabot now. Lannister? Anyway, it was two racing cars, Formula One racing cars, and it was a 30-minute documentary in the middle of this racing show about these two racing cars from the 70s, and it was brilliant. It was amazing. I loved it. But yeah, that's about as into cars as I get. Do you have any plans for Independence Day, says Jacob Brower? No, I don't. I know I need to do something, but I haven't done anything yet. Frozen Nexus says, I wanted to meet you, so I strapped an air horn to an ox. You are not as friendly in person. Okay. Ox air horn? I don't know. All right. Thank you. Thank you very much. Jessica says, you're right. Also, no new music written between 1970 and 2077. Went from Civil War era to modern day in almost 200 years, yet can't rebuild in that same span of time. Single point doesn't make any sense. Well, I agree that a single point doesn't make any sense if there's nothing in that period of time, but clearly there was something. Because between the 1950s and 2077, pre-war America has developed technology that we don't even have in our own universe, including artificial intelligence and robot butlers. Now, obviously, they will have created their own music. The style of that music can't have changed, though. If we're going to be maintaining a 1950s-inspired post-apocalyptic retro-futuristic world, that really can't have changed. So I imagine that that universe will have had all sorts of songs that we don't have in ours. I'm also guessing that all of those records got destroyed. For some reason, the only records that Three Dog got his hands on, maybe he found in a safe, coincidentally also happen to be the ones that were pre-Divergence, in which case we also share them. So just because we don't hear any of the music that universe developed doesn't mean that they didn't develop any music. Jordan says, you sound a lot like Tom Hanks. Please say, are you crying? Are you crying? There's no crying. Oh. Oh, okay. All right. Are you crying? Are you crying? There's no crying in baseball. How's that? Nihonji says, 1931 Cadillac Fleetwood convertible. Smashing. Cool Blue says, how much does different cigars matter to you? Not a whole lot. I typically just find one that I enjoy and I'll smoke it for a while. I'm just trying something new with this particular brand. When are you going to play more L.A. Noire? That'll be coming out soon. Next week. If Fallout is so scientifically advanced, why haven't they advanced TVs? Well, I mean, this is pure speculation, but I'm guessing that the pre-war American media may not have been as free as ours. And I get that impression from the sort of stranglehold that the United States military before the war had on every sector, from news and newspapers and television to John Caleb Bradburton going into his office and trying to get him to do stuff. I mean, they kind of had their foot in everything. And I would imagine that they would also try and get their foot into the entertainment industry. So with lack of reason to, invest in the entertainment industry, perhaps there wasn't that much of a reason to advance in television technology. It is interesting, however, that the trailer for Fallout 76 does have a quasi-color television. We'll have to see what comes of that. Travis says, hey, Ox, your videos are educational and awesome. Thanks, bro. I'm pretty excited for Fallout 76. I'm just waiting for the beta to start. You and me both. Thank you for the sponsorship, Quelvic. I do appreciate it. Tyler says, thanks for the videos. Keep up the good work. Will do. And thank you. Jason says, that was absolutely great, Ox. No crying in baseball. I remember the movie from when I was a kid. It was a great movie. Tyler says, can you start making youth merch? What, like toddler clothes? My shirts come in a variety of both men's and women's sizes, as I say at the end of every video, so you should be able to find something in your size if you are a youth, but I have to admit I don't have infant or toddler clothes. Sleepy Time says, when will we see a new Oxhorn's Mod Muster? Well, I'll be covering Creation Club content this coming week, but probably not a Mod Muster for some time. Quelvic says, love your content, Ox. Been watching since you started on YouTube. Well, thank you, Quelvic, and I'm so glad to have you sponsoring today. Joseph says, your video spying the camp needs an update. You can save the monorail by using a turbo to get on the monorail before it departs the station. Is that true? I'm pretty sure it's a scripted event. So, I mean, there are certain in-quest actions that you take that produces a scripted event. Okay, I see what you're saying. Well, the problem with that is that even if you were to use something like Turbo to get into the monorail to deactivate before it blows up, some of the things that you already triggered in the quest will ultimately lead to you failing it anyway. So Colonel Shu will still pretend like it blew up simply because you got to a certain point in the quest. Though I really should test it to see what happens. Interesting. I hadn't thought about using Turbo. I'll look into that. Smokey says, I just downloaded the Oxhorn Settler mod. That's not from me. Someone made it. But I hope you enjoy it. Flame Incorporated Live says, could pre-war be more of a dictatorship where everything is controlled by the government, from music to what they wear? Also, to that Final Fantasy lore request, I have one on my main channel, Flame Incorporated. Well, there you go. If you want some Final Fantasy, head on over to his channel. Well, I don't know if I would say that they were a dictatorship. I do think that the U.S. government was a bit... They had a... Well, I mean, they sent T-51 wearing soldiers after saving Anchorage to the streets of Boston and LA and Washington, D.C. to restore peace during the food riots. So, I mean, yeah, the military treated people differently. They treated their citizens a lot differently. The America of the Fallout universe is not like ours. It's very, very different. Nihanji says, I tried rendering unto Caesar, but he says my computer graphics were terrible. Quest failed. Render unto Caesar. You're on a roll, my friend. Keep it up. Cool Blue says, I've been drunk gaming to your every video. I love your voice more than Three Dogs. So charismatic. Oh, well, thank you. And I hope you've been enjoying your drunk gaming to my voice. James McNamara says, McNamara says, hey, Oxhorn, what brand of cigars do you smoke? I smoke James Fox Dutch Cigarillos. Also, greetings from Durham. Well, I typically smoke La Aurora y Leons, but I'm trying something new today. This is a Black Market Esteli. Joseph says, I've done it and saved it. Well, it's certainly worth trying. I mean, I'm not going to redo the video for obvious reasons, but yeah, just for my own personal knowledge, I'll definitely try that. See what happens. I wonder though. I wonder how that would work, because in order to get to that point, you have to have made some decisions in the quest which kind of cut you off from the victorious path. You make a lot of mistakes. If it moves away, it's because you didn't catch the bomb or find the evidence in time. Perhaps it was an oversight. Or perhaps it was planned. I don't know. Tim Osteen says, can you talk a bit about the Fallout economy? Why does everything cost so much? Well, I mean, you do have to recall that it's 200 years after, well over 200 years after our own point in time. So, if our grandfathers could, buy a newspaper for a dime or get bubblegum for a penny, and it's only been 60 or so years, imagine what the economy will have changed in, 250 years. Inflation gets exponentially worse in an economy. So it only makes sense that the inflation of 2077... Oh, wait, no, I'm thinking of 2277. Sorry, I'm thinking 2277. Still, I mean, 77 years after many of us were born, that's still a lot of inflation in and of itself. But the primary reason was, of course, because of the resource wars. With the resource wars, well, part of the lore of the game is that fossil fuels were depleted, and because of that, the European Union waged war against the Middle East. But the Middle East ran out of fossil fuel before the war ended, and so they all just turned into warring city-states. But really, America and China were the only two superpowers left that had any stores of fossil fuels, but China was running out, which is why they invaded Alaska. They were trying to get to the oil and the gasoline pipelines in Alaska that were helping to feed America, because America wasn't sharing at the time. That's one of the things that really caused the Great War. America said, you know what, we're just not going to share the fossil fuels that we have, much of which they got from Canada, by the way, which incidentally is one of the reasons they annexed Canada. And so China just says, okay, well, we're gonna invade you to take what we can. But anyway, the point of that is that with with no more fossil fuels, it became much more expensive to ship goods. Incredibly more expensive. So if you want something that was made in China or made in Taiwan or made outside of the United States or even made on the opposite side of the United States, you had to pay somebody to fly that to you or to put it in a truck and drive it to you, which exponentially increased the cost of those goods. And that likely happened to everything. Food that was grown, in the middle of America had to be packaged up and then sent to the west or east coast so the people in the cities could eat it. That food is now extremely expensive because it had to be transported and there were no fossil fuels. Chris Sanderson says, Merry Breakfast, our nay friend Borleyhood Oxhorn. A lot of references to the past there. I once published a Christmas album years ago, and on that album I had a track called Merry Breakfast. And I used to sign off on some of my older videos, completely messing up the neighborhood-friendly Oxhorn thing. Kilo says, do you think a Pacific Northwest Fallout would be good? It would be fascinating. I would love them to do it. I don't think they would. They really enjoy focusing on the East Coast. But, yeah, I'd love it. Mark Lars says, hey, Oxhorn, how would you feel if Bethesda made a Fallout game that allowed you to travel between the Capital Wasteland, the Mojave, and the Commonwealth? I wouldn't like it. I don't want to revisit the places that I visited. I don't want a remastered version of a game I've already played. Because inevitably they're going to change something. They're going to change something that I remember from my time playing that game. If they decided to create this big open world land that also included Boston and the Mojave and the Capital Wastelands, ultimately they're going to leave something out. Because they would have to recreate it in minute detail. It would just be impossible. So no, I'm very happy just playing the games in the worlds as they are and having them build something new. I was really glad to hear West Virginia because that's completely new. And that's what I want to explore. I don't want to explore something I explored before. And Bethesda knows that. Most people probably don't want to do that either. Forza says, hey Oxhorn, I'm on vacation and watching from Farmington, Montana. Great to have you on the program. Miguel says, this is my new theory. What if every single Fallout game is set in a separate parallel universe? Think about it. It's dumb, but it's still my theory. That wasn't me saying that. That was him saying that. I'm not calling him dumb. Well, possible. The problem is that the games do refer to each other a lot. In Fallout 4, we find people whom we met in Fallout 3. McCready is one of them. Dr. Lee is another. And the games often reference each other. So I don't think... Fallout 4 references Fallout New Vegas. If you go to the Med Tech building, you find a terminal that talks about the drug fixer, which we find in New Vegas. And a few other instances like that. Now, perhaps they were referring to one slice of a parallel universe where that happened to be the same... like they were talking about the Mojave Wasteland in their own universe, and it just so happens that Fixer was there. Or perhaps the McCready that we meet in Fallout 4 was a different McCready than the one that we met in Fallout 3. Maybe he was the McCready of the Fallout 4 slice of the universe in that timeline. Also possible, but we have no indication that that's the case. Thank you, new sponsor, Blue Ox Plays. Really appreciate it. Frozen Nexus says, I want a Fallout that just adds you saying yeet every time I throw something. 5,000% replayability. So you throw a grenade and go yeet. Yeet. Mihanji says, Oxhorn, I'll buy some shirts for 1,000 caps. Offer? The problem is that to get any money out of that, I'd have to go and recycle them. No, not really interested. Thanks, though. Were any forms of renewable energy developed after the resource wars? Not to my knowledge, but because of the resource wars, America dumped all of their future into nuclear power. That's why we find so much nuclear technology in the Fallout universe, because fossil fuels were dwindling. I mean, I'm just assuming that solar and wind energy weren't really viable for, you know, for the cars and the vehicles and the sort of military equipment that they're trying to develop. So of course, the only other option is nuclear energy, and that ended up working very well for them until everyone died. Forrester says Missouri Ox, Farmington, Missouri. It's okay. He said Farmington M.O. What's the abbreviation for Missouri? Is it M.O.? What's the abbreviation for Montana? M.N.? I don't know. Tolerable Ship says, what would you think of a Fallout based in China, like it was an American defector or something? It would be really interesting. In more of a novel way. Like, I really want to know what's going on in China. Is it as badly destroyed as America right now? But once that question is answered, we would then have to play the rest of the game in China, and it would just be really difficult. I mean, first of all, we'd have to explain how our character could read Chinese when we can't read Chinese. I mean, I can't read Chinese. And I'm pretty sure they're not going to have the same retro-futuristic culture that we had in America. Like, they would have had their... So, in the Fallout universe, China didn't become an economic superpower in the way that it has in our own world. They kind of took what General Mao, or what Chairman Mao did, and ran with it. So every successor to Chairman Mao just solidified their stranglehold on Chinese culture. So it's very much... In America, it's the 1950s never ended. In China, it's Chairman Mao never died. I mean, he did die in that universe, but it's like that culture. That culture is the same. So yeah, I'd be interested. It would be an interesting DLC. I would give you that. I don't know if I would want an entire game. The Smoky says, isn't Helios 1 a giant solar energy plant? Yeah, it is. Isn't it? I mean, that's why all the panels were there. They were using it for war, Archimedes and all that. But yeah, you're right. They did try solar energy. Poseidon energy at least tried. Little Red said, I'd love to see you make some Elder Scroll videos. Probably not going to happen anytime soon. I do appreciate it, though. He then says, I love your vids. Keep up the good work. Well, thank you very much, Little Red. What about the Cuban Missile Crisis? I don't know if that happened in the Fallout universe or not. I'll have to look that up. Tim Osteen says, were there hard lines between the rich and poor? What were people's salaries like to afford living in the Fallout world? Well, it's hard to say. Really, the only reference point we have is Nate and Nora. But it's not a good one because, first of all, Nate was a U.S. Army veteran, so he likely had his veteran wages, and he must have been paid well. I mean, he certainly had lots of health benefits, and he was regarded as a hero. He was doing local speeches, and he lived in a nice house, and his wife graduated from college as a doctor, as a lawyer doctor, a doctorate in being a lawyer. So I don't think they were they were pretty upper crust. And they were living fairly humbly. I mean, their home, sure, they had a robot butler and a nuclear-powered car. But their home, you know, wasn't a mansion or anything like that. It was a nice little home. But yeah, I don't know if they would be considered the upper crust or like the richy rich or a lower income. I don't know where that lands them. What about the Vietnam War, says Radical Lore? Well, the only bit in the entire franchise we get about the Vietnam War is from the very beginning of Fallout Tactics, where we overhear somebody on the television saying the United States has declared war on Vietnam. And that's it. So we know there was a Vietnam War, and that the U.S. declared war, which didn't happen in the real world. In our universe, it never happened. What happened is we had an extended military engagement in Vietnam, but we never declared war on Vietnam, even though, of course, it's called the Vietnam War today. So I'm presuming that we won the war in the Fallout universe, but we don't know what really happened. Sizzling Means says, isn't there much to say about the Soviet Union in the Fallout universe? There are a few bits here and there, so let's see if I remember everything. There was a character profile in Fallout 1. I forget her name, but it was one of the female characters you could have chosen to play in Fallout 1. And the backstory that they presented for her was that she was the granddaughter of a Soviet Union consulate in Los Angeles. So what we get from that is that the Soviet Union, by the end of the war, had a presence in Los Angeles. So we had diplomatic relations with them. It wasn't like during the Cold War, where there was literally no communication, and we communicated through spies. There was some sort of communication between the two. Now that said, there are a few terminal entries where we read people talking disparagingly about the Soviet Union. And there was one, and I'm trying to remember where it was. I think it was inside the REPCON headquarters, where the terminal entry talked about, they were talking about on-site employee security and who you talk to. It was something about, don't go home and tell your family about what goes on here. You never know when some red Chinese or Russian or Kremlin Kaiser or something will be overhearing you. So that particular terminal entry did talk about the Soviet Union as if they were kind of on the side of the communist Chinese. So, but we do know that our relationship with them was not quite as dark as it was during the Cold War in our universe, but there was still a bit of a strained relationship there. But that's really all we know. What happened to Russia in the Fallout universe? Well, the Soviet Union never collapsed. The Iron Curtain never fell. But, as I just explained, we had diplomatic relations with them in 2077. Rogers, the urban legend, says, a while ago I had a dream after binging on Fallout 4. I was on a barge with dolphin sharks attacking me. What would you think of a Fallout located in Florida, more or less close to Cape Canaveral? It would be interesting. An entire Florida-themed Fallout game? I mean, there's a lot they could do with that. And the space race, of course, would play a big part of that. Cape Canaveral, NASA. That would be really interesting. You know, I'd be open to it. Giovanni says, actually, it definitely is MacReady. Lol, he mentions Little Lamplight. Well, yeah, but I mean, the point is it could be MacReady from Little Lamplight in a different universe, right? Like, the MacReady in the Fallout 3 universe who lived in Little Lamplight could still have lived in Little Lamplight even if he was in an alternate universe. So as the commenter was saying, if Fallout 3 and Fallout 4 were in different universes, you could still have met the same people. Like MacReady in the Fallout 4 universe could have still grown up in Little Lamplight, just like the MacReady in the Fallout 3 universe. So the fact that he mentions the Little Lamplight doesn't mean that he is the same MacReady, if that theory is correct. And I don't think it is. I think it's much more It makes so much more sense that all of the games inhabit the same universe. 8-Bit Fox says stuff from after the Divergence can work within the logic of the universe. For example, the music from the 70s makes sense if it fits the style. Pop music would not. I agree, but why do we have that? I agree, but how do we explain that from a lore perspective? We explain the style of the Fallout universe by using the Divergence. If the Divergence no longer functions as a fixed point in time, we can no longer explain the retrofuturistic lore of the world, which would open the door to things that would break the style of the world, like pop music from the 90s or early 1000s, right? So if we want to avoid that, if we want to freeze the culture of America in a point in time, we have a single point divergence that does so. If it's not a single point divergence, then we open it up to anything. And sadly, that is what has happened. We've already got things. So yeah, sure, we've got Picatinny rails, and that doesn't break the lore of the game. Well, I mean, it doesn't break the feel of the game, but it breaks a single point divergence. And we can't explain how that was able to have been created at that time. That is to say, if we bend a single point divergence to allow Picatinny rails, anything could escape at that time, including something that doesn't fit the style of the game. That divergence is keeping the style in place. Without it, what's keeping that style in place? What's keeping it a 1950s inspired retro-futuristic world if the divergence isn't what's holding that up anymore? We now have to come up with another plot device to explain it. But that was the original point of the divergence to begin with. Dobby Troller says, Oxhorn, do you think the divergence is like the multiverse theory and there was a butterfly effect that made tiny changes that led up to huge ones? I do think that that's ultimately what we have to conclude now. I don't think that that was the original intention by the world builders, by the people who actually created the world. And it poses problems for a retro-futuristic world, as I just tried to explain. Pardon me. But I do think that the evidence we find in the universe leads us to that conclusion. Revolt says, did you always have a sweet hairstyle under that hat? Is that a sweet hairstyle? I apologize for appearing unkempt. I've had a busy week. I'm moving. I haven't had a chance to comb my hair or my beard. But yeah, that's where I'm at. Sky Bozer says, what if there are multiple divergences? Yeah, I mean, that kind of goes into the whole butterfly effect thing and the multiverse. There could have been multiple divergences that would better explain what we find in the game, but any reference to the divergence is always in the singular, never the plural. So if there were multiple divergences, Chris Avalon would have said, the divergences happened after World War II, plural. But he doesn't. He says, the divergence happens after World War II, singular. So why would there be multiple? Why would he use the singular if from the very beginning he intended for there to be many of them? That's the problem. I think Chris Avalon and the world builders who created the universe intended for there to be a singular divergence. I think that after that initial intent, after the release of Fallout 2, that the game series has evolved to such an extent under Bethesda and Obsidian that we can no longer explain what we see in the game with a single point divergence. I think we have to assume in a multiverse or with the butterfly effect or some sort of rolling event that's been rolling through the timeline of Fallout 4 and changing things as it goes along. I don't think we can believe in a single point divergence. But the problem is that we depend upon the single point divergence to explain the frozen 1950s culture. Without a single point divergence, how do we explain that? What has kept that culture from changing? The 1980s, the culture of the 1980s never happened. Grunge in the 1990s never happened. Pop from the 2000s never happened. Emojis from the 2010s never happened. Why? Everyone said the Divergence, but that can no longer explain it. So now, what prevented that culture from evolving? We now need to figure that out. Stories and Games said, has anyone ever told you that you look like Hagrid from Harry Potter? No, you would be the first. Thank you. Brent Herman says, hey Oxhorn, how come in the Fallout lore they say the Enclave built secret bases across the planet, and I get, then he says, I get not having the same enemy over and over again, but not to have them in Boston was a poor choice to me. I don't see that because the Enclave has been defeated. They're done. Like, not only were they defeated in Fallout 2 at the end of the oil rig, I mean, it was already a stretch to bring the Enclave all the way to the East Coast. And I don't want to spoil the plot for people who haven't played Fallout 3, but at the end of Fallout 3, there is an option to defeat the Enclave definitively. We do find Enclave remnants in Fallout New Vegas, which happens a few years after the events of Fallout 3, but there's no reason to suspect that there would be any Enclave in Boston. We could have maybe seen some Enclave remnants in Boston, but any remaining members of society that used to be a part of the Enclave have integrated back into society. Obsidian clearly defined that in Fallout New Vegas. If you watch my video on the Enclave remnants, their entire command structure was completely obliterated by the time of Fallout 3. Mainly in Fallout 2, like they referenced, the Enclave remnants referenced a lot of what happened on the oil rig as the downfall of the Enclave. So perhaps they were already at that point disconnected from the Enclave on the East Coast. So the Enclave on the West Coast fell with the destruction of the oil rig, but there was still some Enclave on the East Coast which maintained their structure until the events of Fallout 3. So I don't know. I don't think there's any reason to expect to see them again. Now, we could see them in Fallout 76, right? Because it's a prequel. So that's always possible. Matthew says, hey Oxhorn, I've been a big fan since I stumbled across your videos a few years ago. I'm from the real Quincy, Massachusetts, and it was very surreal to hear you talk about my city in your videos. Well, I'm glad that you're on the program. I'd love to visit Quincy after having learned a lot about them in the game. That's one of the things I find after playing Fallout 4. I really want to go to Boston and visit all of these places. But I know that doing so, I'd probably be disappointed because it wouldn't be anything like what I see in the games. Terry says, with the military being so in control or having their fingers in so many pies, weapon developers could develop new innovations for their products. Yeah? Well, what's your point? I don't get it. I mean, anyone could innovate. If you're trying to say that constant warfare is enough innovation to explain why we find many of the exact same types of guns in both universes, if that's what you're trying to say, then you're missing the point. I mean, yeah, there's plenty of money and reason to innovate new guns. But the point is that it's extremely unlikely, to the point of being almost impossible, for someone in one universe to develop the exact same type of gun, down to the rivets, down to the ammunition used, at around the same time period as it was developed in our own world. And for that to happen over and over and over and over again, as we see, especially in Fallout New Vegas, with all the different types of guns they've got there that are identical to the ones that we find in our own universe. To have that happen once, hard enough to believe. To have it happen many, many times, extremely difficult to believe. So it's not the lack of it's not a lack of innovation that I'm worried about, and it's not a lack of need that I'm also worried about. It's, if anything, there would be way more types of weapons in the Fallout universe than in ours. Taylor says, good evening, Oxhorn. Keep up the good work. Love your videos. Thank you very much. Mr. Junk Mock says, there's a character in Far Harbor who used to be in the Enclave. He's a child of Adam. I forgot his name. No, you're right. Yeah, that's right. He was at the Nucleus. He's the guy you meet when you first arrive at the Nucleus. Oh, his name is at the tip of my tongue. I forget it. But you're right. Yeah. Abby says, I recently bought a blue Oxhorn hoodie on your merch site, and I love it. I've gotten a few compliments already. Keep up the great work, Oxhorn. I'm a longtime fan and always will be. Well, thank you very much, Abby. I really appreciate it. Dobby Troller says, Oxhorn, maybe like sometime in the 50s, one person made one different choice in this alternate universe, and that caused everything to change, but some of the stuff in the future stayed the same, with tiny changes. Yeah, I mean, that seems to be a popular opinion. The problem is that, okay, if we think of time like a pond, and you throw a stone into a pond, it ripples out in all directions, touching absolutely everything, and changing, the way that those atoms are aligned. If someone throws another rock into that pond, in any other spot, a new set of ripples are birthed that then collide with the other ripples, again changing absolutely everything. And that's how I think a lot of the Divergence stuff works. If even a small thing is changed, it's kind of like going back in time. If you go back in time and change even a small thing, you don't really understand the repercussions of that, especially when human lives are at stake. The Divergence events between the Fallout universe and our own universe are so extreme. I mean, entire wars not happening. Entire wars that we've never had happening. Entire civilizations crumbling because of the resource wars. Those aren't small things. Those are huge things that completely impact entire continents filled with people. I mean, by the time the bombs drop in 2077, Europe and the Middle East have devolved into warring city-states because all fossil fuels have been completely depleted. That's not tiny. That's a huge, huge, huge thing, impacting millions upon millions of lives, some of whom probably worked as scientists for universities, created vaccines in our own universe, or became fathers and mothers to the people who would have done those things. Those people now no longer being born in the Fallout universe because they died in the resource wars, right? You see how great those implications are? The likelihood, in my opinion, of even finding a small amount of things that are identical that late in the timeline of the Fallout universe to ours is just so extremely unlikely that it's hard to believe if there was a single point divergence, which of course means we've got to believe that it wasn't a single point divergence, that it was a rolling divergence, that something had like the butterfly effect. Jessica says the retrofuturism is less pronounced in Fallouts 1 and 2 than in Fallout 3 and beyond. Fallouts 1 and 2 had an aesthetic more like Mad Max, A Boy and His Dog, and other 1970s, 80s post-apocalyptic fiction. And you know what? You're right. You are absolutely right. That is true. Bethesda really embraced the sort of 1950s atomic vibe in Fallout 3. And I really enjoyed that. I mean, I do enjoy Fallout 1. I've been playing it a lot recently. And I enjoyed what I have played of Fallout 2. But you are right. They did have a sort of Mad Max 1970s, 80s vibe going on there. So maybe we should stop worrying about this. Maybe it's just too much to deal with. I don't know. But I do know that I really need to go. We've been here for a good, wow, is it really that time? Well over an hour. How long have we been doing this? An hour and 20 minutes. I didn't expect to be broadcasting that long. I got to go read the kids a story, tuck them into bed, and then finish this cigar. So I'm going to let you all go. What's your favorite faction in Fallout New Vegas, says Dusk Thunder. It's a really hard one. I like House, even though I dislike House. I like the NCR, even though I dislike the NCR. I like the Followers, but I don't think that they're very wise. I just think that they got big hearts. It's hard. Kings. I'm going to say the Kings. I like the Kings. Anyway, that's the last question, ladies and gentlemen. I really appreciate it. I had a blast chatting with you all about my favorite hobby in the entire world, and I hope you guys had a blast as well. Thanks for watching my video on the Divergence this morning. No video tomorrow because I took today off to shoot footage and hang out with the family, but I will have a video for you on Tuesday, and more videos coming out later next week. We've got a video on LA Noire coming, I've got some Creation Club content coming, and then some Rivet City content coming. So, stay tuned for all of that. Of course, when the beta comes out for Fallout 76, I'll be playing Fallout 76 like a madman. I'll be doing a ton of live streams and producing content like crazy. So, lots of stuff to look forward to. The Republic of Dave says Beastmaster. I already did it. I did that one already. Check it out. Ian says, this is bugging me now. I disagree with your technology and timeline argument. Disregarding what was going on in the background, we don't see. I mean, I understand that you disagree with me, but what are you suggesting that I'm disregarding? I mean, I think there is a lot going on in the background that we don't see, that you're completely right. But we do know what happens, well, I mean, we can presume what happens when anything in the past is changed. And so if something happens at a specific time, we can, you know, project forward to imagine all of the different things that would have changed. So I don't think I'm disregarding that. I'm kind of, I thought I covered that by talking about the pool rebels. Multiverse theory allows for infinite variations and similarities, but most important to Fallout lore is the constant war never changes. And indeed, that's true. Okay, I really gotta go. Thanks, everybody. I appreciate it. I'll see you guys later. Have a good one.